Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and we're going to be doing another episode. This episode for the New Yorker is going to be going over Race and IQ by Charles Murray. This was an interview done by John Stossel. About 5 days ago, it was published.
People hate this man. They call Charles Murray dangerous. Why? Because he wrote this book, which includes research into IQ differences among different racial groups.
Charles Murray, get out of town! By any means necessary, shut him down!
But the activist's reflexive anger obscures the fact that Murray's not a white supremacist. He's a thoughtful researcher. He's published more than a dozen scholarly books. This one, The Pursuit of Happiness and Good Government, influenced the way I think about government. It's about how, as a young Peace Corps volunteer in Thailand, he saw how government aid made people dependent and even unhappy.
They destroyed the ability of that village to run its own affairs. They weren't as united. They didn't function as a community. I saw what government looks like from Bangkok and how it looks to the villager. And it's the same as in the United States,
where billions more is being spent on government welfare programs and more Americans become dependent on government. Aren't you upset?
How to store and sort all your photos and videos in seconds. No computer knowledge required. This tiny device.
I'm deeply depressed. No, it's worse than that. I don't see a way back out.
So why are you smiling?
Because what else am I going to do?
Americans becoming dependent on government is the theme of Murray's best-selling book, Losing Ground. Losing Ground influenced presidents.
The scholarly work of Charles Murray.
Presidents from both parties.
I think he did the country a great service.
Bill Clinton then passed welfare reform.
No one wants to change the welfare system as badly as those who are trapped in it.
But today's activists ignore all Murray's work except for the bell curve. These students at Vermont's expensive Middlebury College stopped Murray from speaking. They consider his ideas too dangerous to even let people hear them. I think it's important to hear what people like him say. We talked for more than an hour. Middlebury, what did you think?
I was shocked. And I'm smiling because I was shocked, but not scared, not, oh dear, what's going to happen? I'm standing up in front of the crowd and they're all chanting and chanting and chanting, but I don't really think that anybody's going to rush the stage. And they didn't. And so that was a situation I'd been in before. I'd had protests.
This is important to mention because this happened to many conservative talk show individuals. There's been protests with Ben Shapiro. There has been protests with Candace Owens. There's been protests even dealing with scholars on the subject, where the wokeism that's going on in the campuses are making scholars and op-ed individuals pariahs if they're not pushing a particular political agenda. And that political agenda that they want, that the ultra-liberal wants, is an agenda, which is an agenda that is pushing for more government intrusion on one's life, more government control, more handouts, more welfare. And if you have data to show that those programs are ineffective and wasteful, then they try to shut you down. They try to make you a pariah. So this happened at Harvard with Roland Frye, where he was proving that structural racism in the school system could be rectified. This, and scores for children that are in the lower income bracket that are Black could be rectified by redoing the school system. But he got a big pushback by the school boards and by the teacher labor associations and the scholars that were saying the opposite, that it needed more money, more funding, more wasteful spending. And it's sad because Professor Fry, has a solution to the problem, and that is invest in children at a very young age, and that there's going to be a compound effect where they're going to do better in school, and give them more time to be able to get those early skills in math and in reading. And when you do that, then you're going to have a much better outcome for the child in terms of scholastic achievement, instead of just spending wasteful dollars and creating more division in the society. So here, if you bring data to the table and question the outcomes of some of these social programs, the ultra liberal movement will go against you. And wokeism on campus will just, instead of having a free thought and free debate of different ideas, what's happening is the ultra liberal movement on campus is canceling opposite opinions, opposite data, opposite political perspectives. And so they don't, this movement that's going on campus, they don't want really dissenting opinions. They want conformity. This is becoming a Gestapo-like environment. Now, from my estimation, I think it's getting worse. I don't think this is just going to phase out because, they're in their youthful years. I think that this is going to translate into ultra-liberalism even in their mid-adult life. This is kind of what I'm seeing with, New York and even, parts of Massachusetts. So I think this is a big problem. People need to start waking up to the fact that these schools, even the elite schools, but it's not just the elite, it's, it goes all the way to the state schools, that they are not bastions of new ideas and a cross-pollination of thought, but it's a bastion of conformity, and that anyone that says something that is antithetical to the ultra liberal agenda, the student body tries to cancel it. So keep that in mind, that scholars that have data proving things should not be, quote, canceled because the other side, the ultra liberals, don't like what the conclusion is from the data that has been collected. So to solve social problems, we need data, and we need to have an open mind in interpreting the data to the point where we can actually solve the social problems that we have. Now, when you give children, let's say if you apply what Dr. Fry said to do for Black children in America, in the inner city, and that was implemented, and the outcomes become much better, that means that you have a more productive society, and you no longer have the big push that's going on for reparations. this is the reason why the ones that want to push the reparations and the victimhood and all this stuff, they try to cancel Dr. Fry. You know, that's just wrong. I mean, he has a solution that actually would help everyone, and that is bringing up big parts of society into a realm where they can be more productive citizens. You know, so that those early days of investment in a child is really, really important, because there's a compound effect that takes place. So just keep that in mind as we go through this video.
And people chanting at speeches. What I did not have any other time after we left the stage and went down to stream my speech in a little studio were people banging on the walls and trying to get into the room, trying to get through the door. And all at once I said, this is no fun. And then it ended, the day ended with us walking out to go to the car. By we, I mean Bill Berger, who was one of the administrators who was running the event, and Allison Stanger, the professor who was moderating my appearance. And we come out the door and we have two security guys, Middlebury security guys, but just two. And there's a mob out there with some really big guys that didn't look like Middlebury students to me, who are standing between us and where we have to go. And you suddenly realized you didn't have the option of just standing there or going back in the building, which would have been craven. So we just pushed ahead. And at that point, I remember saying to myself, do not fall down. Do not go to the ground, because that felt like a really bad idea.
What might have happened? They're not going to trample you.
I had the feeling that that group just might. But remember, Allison Stanger's holding on to my elbow, not to protect herself. She's protecting me. She's leading. And she gets a concussion and strained tendons when somebody bangs into her from one direction and somebody had grabbed onto her hair from another direction. So for her, it was no fun at all. And in fact, she couldn't teach for the rest of the term because of the concussion.
They're that angry at you because you're perpetuating racism.
These kids had never read a word of anything I'd ever written. So it was a ginned up phenomenon that also hit a lot of other people on the right who tried to talk at colleges. My wife's theory, and I think she's right, is they want a way to get at Trump, and anybody on the right is sort of their way of expressing their anger at what's going on. So I'm not at all sure it was specifically focused on the work of Charles Murray. I think it's Charles Murray as portrayed by the Southern Poverty Law Center that they were going after.
I pledge allegiance to the flag. You know, it was that pledge and the flag on the wall behind me that was my final straw. When I saw companies supporting celebrities who would take a knee for the flag, I tapped out. And I realized that I've got a lot more power.
The Southern Poverty Law Center calls you a white nationalist.
Yeah, they call almost anybody a white nationalist who they don't like. That outfit is so sleazy.
You say white men are intellectually, psychologically, and morally superior.
I've never said that. I've never said anything remotely like that. And once I had what I called editing my Southern Poverty Law Center material. And I went through and I copy edited it all, and with comments about, you really got to take out this because I never said it. Or in other cases, they have a quote and I say, well, yeah, that quote I said, but here are the next 3 sentences you left out. Of course, nobody ever really reads that kind of thing. I put it on the AEI website. But the fact is that you have people at the Southern Poverty Law Center who are willing to lie and pull out of context, and they would be laughable, except they get so much attention.
And you think the kids read what the Southern Poverty Law Center writes?
You know, I'd like to.
It goes beyond that. I think it's also where you have the establishment, as we're going through confirmation for judges, especially the Supreme Court judges that are conservative, they will demonize the family and many things about their record, make stories up and try to discredit these people far more. I mean, 10x more than anything that the Republicans do to Democrat nominees. There's an evilness, a viciousness that comes out of this liberal policy, to the point where you probably are seeing illegal activity that needs to be dealt with.
Have a better grip on who it is that communicates all this stuff. But obviously, about a variety of people, and I'm one of them, the caption for me is he believes blacks are genetically inferior to whites. The students, they don't feel any obligation to investigate this. They just take it as.
Do you believe that blacks are intellectually inferior?
I bridle at the word inferior. Yeah, what do I believe? In the same sense that I believe that the Battle of Gettysburg occurred, it is that if you give mental tests to a representative sample of whites and a representative sample of blacks, that there will be about a 1 standard deviation difference, which amounts to about 15 IQ points between those scores.
And the thing is that his data seems to overlap some of the data that's out there dealing with the military when they did IQ tests between different ethnicity groups that were enlisting in the military and what those differences in IQ were. So the reason why the military was doing it was they wanted to understand what the lowest IQ that they could deal with in terms of training a soldier.
To then translate that into people being inferior and superior is idiotic. Are you really under the impression that someone who has an IQ that's 20 points lower than yours feels inferior to you? I know lots of people out near my home in rural Maryland who I'm sure of two things. One, they can do all sorts of things that are really important to my life that I can't do, such as fix the plumbing, get my electrical circuits working correctly. I'd be stuck if they weren't around. And the second thing is, I am quite confident that they don't look at me and think that they are inferior to me in any way. I am somewhat different than them in my skill set and in my lifestyle and things like that. So what?
You don't think they look at you and say, oh, he's incompetent. These intellectuals can't do anything.
Oh, of course they say that. But of course they're being accurate when they say that. That when they look at me and they roll their eyes when I'm so happy that they've come out and fixed something that if I were a competent male, I could have fixed myself. But they don't think of that as being anything more than a quirk. Suppose that they would have trouble doing advanced calculus. So what, in terms of evaluating them as a human being?
This all starts with your book, The Bell Curve. These are the bell curves, the distribution of IQ. And whites are, as you say, a standard deviation ahead. But I'm told the tests are biased.
Well, that falls in the category of this huge gap between what is known scientifically and what the elite conventional wisdom is. Because you're right, the elite conventional wisdom is the tests are biased. That has been studied to a fare thee well. And I'm not talking about 6 studies say that they are biased and 10 studies say that they aren't. I say I can point to 100 studies that were unable to find any evidence of bias versus virtually none that have any empirical reason for saying they're biased.
You stand by it today. Blacks on average have a lower IQ.
Blacks on average have a lower IQ than whites. East Asians on average have a higher IQ than whites. Ashkenazi Jews have higher IQs than Gentile whites. If you take a hierarchy of groups and their mean IQs, whites are not at the top. We are probably number 3 or number 4.
The New York Times Magazine's response to this is to call you the most dangerous conservative. You said you were surprised how fierce the attacks were. Why were you surprised?
Well, this just goes to show how out of touch I was when we were writing it. By the way, people who haven't read the bell curve should understand we're talking about chapter 13. So what went on in the 12 preceding chapters? The 12 preceding chapters were talking about the role of IQ in all sorts of outcomes in life, from income to education to child rearing and so forth. And we said at the beginning of all those chapters, so that we can sort of take the whole race issue out of the conversation, let's just look at a sample of non-Latino whites. And here's why IQ is important. Okay, so we get to chapter 13. I thought Dick Hernstein, my co-author, and I did a beautiful job on that chapter. I thought we said to the reader, people run screaming from the room if you talk about black and white differences in IQ. And actually, there's no reason to do that. You can look at all the facts squarely in the face, and this is not something that should cause you to lose sleep at night. It's not a big deal.
Why is it not a big deal?
Because you judge other people as individuals, not as members of groups in supposedly this society. That is the ideal. And if we sit down across from each other and you are black, I can't assume that you're not as smart as I am. And if you sit down across from me and you're Asian, I can't assume that I'm not as smart as you are. I've got to talk to you and deal with you as an individual. And if you do that, group means in something like IQ are just as meaningless as group means in something like fast twitch muscles, which accounts for the fact that I don't think there's been a white winner of the 100-yard dash in the Olympics for a zillion years. Not quite literally that, but close. You don't judge people by what color they are in the starting block of the race. You judge them by how it ends up. And if you treat people as individuals, most of the problems go away.
But it's generally forbidden to even talk about or study racial differences. And the sprinters are a good example. You were quoted saying you thought people would say it's about time we're talking about these issues that have been swept under the rug.
Yep.
And I interviewed you for 2020 and thought, yeah, we ought to discuss these issues because people whisper about them, and that's not good.
And they think it's a lot worse than it is. However, I had to revisit this just a couple of years ago after the Black Lives Matter thing. And the most recent book I wrote was called Facing Reality. And it was 2 truths about race in America, and having to do with crime rates and having to do with IQ. And the reason I felt compelled to do that was it is not the case that thousands of black men are being shot by cops at random. In fact, the numbers are, you're talking very small numbers. And if they say, oh, but more blacks are shot than whites, people have got to come to grips with the fact that the people who are committing the crimes, there's a
Exactly. See, here's the problem is that when data is actually being collected and being disseminated to the population about what's going on with, let's say, police brutality against blacks, or as statistics, right? Or dealing with government programs and how they're failing Black communities. When you start showing this type of data and it goes against the ultra liberal agenda, they will try to discredit the research or try to discredit the individual. They don't want to hear that actually black on black crime is much greater than white on black crime. And not only that, there is, at least in New York, from the observation is that you don't see that many whites attacking and doing knockout game type stuff on the subway system. That is a black phenomenon. Now, some of it is younger black phenomena, but it is a black phenomena on other races. What about the Asian hate racial hate that was going on just about a year ago by black adolescents and 20-year-olds. So the data is showing that actually there's a lot of black on black crime, and there's a lot of black on white crime. There's not that much white on black crime, but it does exist. And a lot of the education data that's coming out that has been published by Fry, suggests that, hey, why not just change these school systems to be more centric in giving the children the attention that they need to be able to get up to speed with their reading and their writing and their mathematics. And then the outcomes for these children are going to be far better. But they don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that they actually have to work harder. They don't want to hear that actually religion is an important feature on a stable society. They don't want to hear that a strong family unit is important for the foundation of that society. And country, having affinity for country is important, because all three of those pillars that I just mentioned are antithetical to the ultra left movement. They want to destroy God, country, and the family unit. So, keep that in mind, that these people don't want to hear about data. They just want to hear opinion. They just want, it's about a political agenda. And the ones that are pulling the strings with the ultra liberal movement is trying to do demonization. They're trying to do an oppressor versus oppressee. And we need to fight back on that.
Differential. So this is a case where group outcomes did become important, not because people like me were saying something, but because Microsoft executives and the Black Lives Matter people and the evening news.
Here's another problem impacting Black people and other people of color: systemic racism.
And everybody else was saying things about racism in this society on the basis of evidence that simply ignored these group differences in IQ and in crime rates. And so I figured I did not have the option of sitting back and not writing anything. Facing reality does not have a dedication.
So let's step back and just reiterate what he said. You have an ultra liberal agenda out there talking about systemic racism, but not understanding that there are statistical differences when you're talking about groups in terms of IQ and outcomes. And perhaps, here's a classic example. The largest continent in the, that's inhabited, severely inhabited is Africa. It has an amazing amount of resources. The cradle of civilization seemed to have come out of Africa. And that is roughly the poorest region in the world. Why is that? It's populated by Blacks. They've been given resources. They were given, in terms of societal progress, societal evolution, they had they were a first mover. And why is it that you have societies in Asia and in Europe and in South America and North America that are far more advanced than anything that came out of Africa? So, you know, there may be actually something to what Charles Murray is saying about the actual mean IQ. And it's not just that, it's not just the mean IQ of a population or of a sample that represents a population, but it's also, you have the individual IQ and you have the group IQ. And it's very possible that the potentiality for these individuals could reach much higher levels if certain types of things are implemented that are being prescribed by Dr. Fry. Those outcomes for those individuals that are in the Black community would probably be better, much more productive, much more stable. But, you know, when you have this, when the group intelligence goes down even farther, it's harder for that society or those countries to be able to get out of some of the poverty that they're in. And then you have the warlords, and you have, and what you're going to hear from the other side, the ultra liberal side, is that it's colonization that, you know, ruined Africa. Africa had a head start in civilization centuries before Europe or Asia, but they just did that way before colonization. And a part of the slave trade was that the rulers that were that were governing their society in Africa were selling their people, or selling, you know, maybe not their people, but the people that they captured in a war or whatever, their enemies. But it was the Black, you know, it's not as so simple as just saying that it was only whites that were part of the slave trade. There were also Blacks that were part of the slave trade in Africa. So, you know, do you go to those countries and ask for reparations? If you're asking for reparations from the American citizen, especially whites, you're saying that there's systemic racism, so therefore there should be reparations. Well, why isn't there reparations against Congo? Why isn't there reparations against Nigeria? You know, so you know that it's just not being intellectually honest to just say that this structural racism is just from colonization and you know, the white colonists. That's too simplistic. It was much more, there was more of an integration that was going on with Africa. But even without, even putting aside that, the whole slave trade that was going on at the time, these societies just didn't develop. And that there needs to be a reason. People need to explain the reason why Africa could not develop in a peaceful, harmonious, productive society. And when you get to those root causes, you're going to start probably seeing similar conclusions to what Charles Murray is having to say and what Fry is having to say. It's about early investment in children, seeing that there are some deficits compared to their other ethnic peer groups, and giving them the opportunity to be the best that they can be. And what's amazing is that if you invest in children early and you give them a stable environment, they will flourish. So the data is out there. The solution to the problem has been discussed for probably around 15 to 20 years. It's been out there. Just the ultra liberal doesn't want to listen to the solution and to improve the outcomes. They want to do the blame game.
It does not have any acknowledgments. I wanted to keep my friends and colleagues as segregated from any identification with this as I could, because I thought that book would raise a ruckus. It didn't.
When I talked to you for 2020, much like we are now, I thought in the 15 minutes at the time we had for stories on 2020, we might have a serious discussion. But then I was disappointed. They decided, no, we can't. Even then, long before Black Lives Matter, we don't want to put this on. And I reluctantly called you and told you, expecting you to be very upset, because we haven't had a big audience then. But you just said, it's just as well. This doesn't make anyone happy.
And it wasn't the point of the book. The point of the book of the bell curve was that IQ has become really important in explaining a variety of phenomena in this country. A theme I return to and coming apart 20 odd years later, because a lot of the polarization and the segregation and the elite attitudes toward things have been driven by the way that over the course of the 20th century, the whole social structure of the United States has been affected by the increasing importance of IQ in the economy. That's the point.
And it's more important now because
it's worth a lot more money to be really smart now than it used to be. If you go back to the 1920s and you're a lawyer, you're probably making a good income. In the town you live in, you're in the upper middle class, but you aren't rich because you can charge lawyers fees for doing wills and minor legal things. If you have exactly the same level of ability as a lawyer now, if you are doing multinational deals, you can be worth a commission of millions of dollars putting together these extremely complex things. That happened not just in the law, it happened in advertising, it happened in the IT industry, obviously. And people have gotten rich because they have high IQ in a way now that didn't happen in 1900. Another aspect of it is that, guess what? You had an elite that was increasingly convinced of its own superiority. Because I will tell you one set of people who really do think that having a high IQ is a big deal in terms of your human worth are people with really high IQs, especially in academia. And when they get up in the morning, they're comparing themselves to their colleagues. Am I as smart as that guy? And they really do look down on people.
This is what I saw with covering COVID in 2020. A lot of people were going after me, especially PhDs in the sciences, the hard sciences, such as let's say molecular biology, or maybe even virology. And they were like going, there's no way that Dr. Paul Cottrell would be able to know all this information and blah, blah, blah. But the reality of the situation is that there are people that are polymaths that can see patterns way before others see them. Now that's been honed for me because, I've, had a career in automotive engineering, and did a lot of CAD work and a lot of tool and die design and all that, and a lot of automotive design. So I had this visual development of my brain, spatial development of my brain, because of my engineering background, but also the pattern recognition in trading the financial markets, and my experience and perspective in chaos theory. And then it just so happened at the time that COVID was happening, I had knowledge in the sciences, especially in the medical sciences, dealing with my coursework at the time in biology, and my coursework in my pre-med at the time. And then as I was covering COVID throughout the 4 years, my studies in medical school. So there was this pre-med, the master's, and my knowledge, from medical school and what I saw in clinic, treating some patients. So, I had a really good perspective, but I saw this very thing that he's talking about, where people that just wrote papers and didn't have such a polymath oriented life experience, they felt that they were superior and that I was inferior. The reality of the situation is this: there's no one on the face of the planet that warned the public as early and as accurately as Dr. Paul Cottrell, period, full stop. Nobody. In addition, there's nobody that has been as accurate about how the aftershock of the era evolved, emerged, and how it is emerging at a societal level and at a pathophysiological level. Nobody. So, it's not, but the main point of what Charles Murray is saying is that you have academics, ones that have sheepskin, because of their scholastic achievement, and they're always measuring themselves to others, thinking that they're the smartest ones in the room. And the reality is that there are a lot of smart people, but some of it's luck, some of it's being in the right place at the right time. But a big part of it, at least for me, is having that multitude of experience and that synergistic stewing of that experience, to being able to convey to the public on an emerging crisis that many people either did not believe, many people were late to the party when they started understanding what was going on. And there are many academics that still don't understand what's going on and still get it wrong. But the bottom line is that Dr. Paul Cottrell was the first and the most accurate, not just during the crisis, but also in the aftershock of the crisis. So, for all the haters out there, go fuck yourself.
Who aren't as smart as they are. And that attitude of looking down at the yokels is palpable now in a way that in 1950 would not have happened, because it was the moral center and the spine of the country was seeing an ordinary people, and we called these intellectuals long hairs, and they were kind of objects of ridicule and fun. And that flipped. So that's just a couple of examples of why this is so important to what's gone on.
I only read the bell curve, and it wasn't easy because I was influenced by your previous work in Pursuit of Happiness and Good Government. This was jaw-dropping for me. I'd been a consumer reporter. I was starting to look at the government's solutions. I was advocating. I discovered your book and thought, oh my God, this is it. This explains so much I haven't understood before.
Want to create lifelong memories for your family this summer? Then take them on an authentic safari.
And one example, you write about your time with the Peace Corps in Thailand. Tell us about that.
Well, you are referring to my own favorite of my books, In Pursuit.
Good.
And basically, John, I've been in the tank for you ever since you first told me that you like that book, because I like it too, and it's not well known at all. And this is why I quit my job back in 1979, a good job. I was chief scientist of a good-sized research company, because I wanted to explore the relationship of human happiness, human flourishing, if you want to call it that, to policy. And that's the book I wanted to write. The basic idea of In Pursuit is as follows: human flourishing, human happiness defined pretty much as Aristotle defined it, namely lasting and justified satisfaction with life as a whole. And a quick example of why this is relevant to policy: think in terms of the basic human need for respect and self-respect. I think that is a built-in, hardwired human need. I think we all want to achieve self-respect. If you are a guy who is not the smartest guy in the world, but you work hard at a manual job and you make money that supports a wife and children, puts food on the table and a roof over their head, historically in the United States of America, you had standing within your community that was equal to everybody else. You were being a good American, taking care of yourself, taking care of your family, even though you weren't making a lot of money. Suppose we have a social policy which has the following results. It gives that guy more money, but he also doesn't work for it. He just gets it. What does this do to his self-respect? What does this do to his place in the community? Well, if he continues to support a wife and child at his manual job, it shouldn't do anything to it. But in fact, it does, because he's less likely to do that. Why am I doing this boring job if I don't have to? So you have something that is seen usually as a good thing. We increase the money going to low-income people. And I'm saying that's not good enough. You've got to analyze how social policy is affecting the ability of people to live satisfying, meaningful lives. And In Pursuit was the result.
And you cite that Aristotle said,
This is why, people would say, well, that's all good and dandy for the Reagan era and the Clinton era when they were restructuring, welfare, doing welfare reform. Well, it dovetails right into what's going on in the current cycle of politics, and that is the talk about universal income, especially with the implementation of artificial intelligence, when there's going to be a shift in the demand for labor. Society is not going to be as productive. And not just that, you are going to have societal problems where there's going to be more crime, there's going to be more violence, there's going to be more unrest, and more urban decay. Universal income is going to lead to a welfare state.
Route to Happiness was pushing hard to achieve goals. And
he said you ought to live a life of activity in accord with virtue. And by that, I mean, it's not enough to feel good. You can feel good with drugs. You have to have a justified reason for feeling good, and you don't have that with drugs. And also Aristotle said something that I think is so profound about human enjoyment. Human beings enjoy the exercise of their realized capacities. Why is it that J.K. Rowling still writes books? She has zero financial incentive to write books. She is exercising her realized abilities. On a much lesser scale, why do I continue to write books?
Why do I continue to make videos?
Or
That's
why
what
make-
I'm good at.
No, I don't consider I'm exercising my realized capabilities now, John. You are. I'm not. I'm exercising my realized abilities when I'm sitting in front of that computer monitor, staring at it, typing for a minute, erasing it, going back and doing it again. And I enjoy that. That's true up and down the line. A cabinet maker gets the same kind of satisfaction. And that's at the core. You want a society in which people are given lots and lots of opportunities and incentives to learn how to do something well that they love doing.
And in Pursuit of Happiness and Good Government, you write about a model village, the pride of the government in Thailand.
Now think about this. If you start doing reparations, what's going to happen? And you're giving reparations to a society that already is having problems being productive and being a law-abiding. It's only going to make it worse because their self-worth will go down. And my worry is that because it doesn't solve the problem, they're going to act like a child, start destroying something, causing more crime in the society, and the politics will be, well, just give them more money, and it will be just rewarding for bad behavior. It's not going to be a very productive concept. That we this is like a 2.3 trillion or more dollar problem if they decide to implement reparations at the federal level. Major problem. You know, the thing is that people need to wake up to the fact that pull up your pants, make your bed, brush your teeth, be a productive citizen. There is more opportunity for everyone in this society if they want to learn and to work hard. That doesn't mean that everyone's going to be a billionaire. And there's going to be differences in income distribution. So not everyone's going to be at the finishing line with, you know, the same amount of money. But the reality of the situation is that in society in the United States, there's lots of opportunity if you decide to work hard and to learn. Now, there's different ways to learn. There's, you know, going through formal education. There's going through informal education. But the whole idea is to learn and get skills and to work hard and to be a productive citizen. But if you're starting to give handouts in a welfare state, and you are doing universal income and reparations and all these things that the data suggests that this is going to make the society in the long run more unproductive, then we have a problem.
Creative projects, a fish pond, a new school building, cotton growing project, and a health clinic.
Yeah, and he was well-meaning. I knew him. I talked to him, but he sort of looked upon the villagers as these objects so that he was trying to help. And the village before he
Much like our government does for us now.
Well, that's why the process of being in Thailand had such a profound effect on me. I saw what government looks like from Bangkok and how it looks to the villager. And it's the same as in the United States, the way government looks from Washington, D.C. versus the way it looks out in a little town in Maryland where I live. What they did when they came in there was they destroyed the ability of that village to run its own affairs. And that made a huge difference in the quality of life, in that village. And that is really in microcosm the story of what's happened in the United States.
The villagers said plainly that life in this model village got worse.
Yep, they weren't as happy as they used to be. They weren't as united. They didn't function as a community. They didn't function as families as they had before.
The book
And the reason why is it's the emergent property of the capitalistic system. All right. And there is such a thing as the bourgeoisie virtue. All right. Let the capitalistic system work instead of injecting in socialistic policies. See, when you try to engineer society, you're not going to get the outcomes that you thought you were going to get. Or even worse off, if you know that socialistic policies are going to make society worse and you want that society to be worse, it's actually a weapon against society. So there's two different ways to look at this. It's social programs being a weapon against the society, or kind-hearted individuals just not knowing any better that socialistic programs are going to make things worse. Hayek, this debate goes back all the way to Keynes and Hayek. All right, dealing with the Federal Reserve. Should they print money or should they not print money? Should there be fiscal stimulus or not fiscal stimulus? So there's two different camps, right? If you're a Keynesian, you're going to want more money printed and more social programs, more fiscal spending. And, you know, the Hayek crowd is going to be the Austrian school of thought, which is basically capitalism. Less fiscal spending and less monetary expansion to prop up the society. And I think what you're seeing here is that if you have a society that goes the route capitalism, not unfettered capitalism, there needs to be some regulation and there needs to be some sort of safety net for certain individuals. You know, if they lose their job and, you know, for them to get back on their feet. But the key is that they get back on their feet. Now, there's going to be some situation where part of the population may, you know, have some sort of injury and they can't work anymore, or they were a veteran that had, you know, war injuries and they're having problems working for whatever reason. But that's not a major part of the society. So we do need to have a safety net for some people, but not for the majority. And so we have to, you know, create incentives in the society where that forces them to sink or swim. And the reality of the situation is that the ultra liberal Democrat is creating policies to try to get votes, but what will happen is it makes the society even worse off. And we're going to lose this country if we continue down this road.
that made you famous and was a big bestseller came before these other books, Losing Ground, which meant what it says. People who were being helped by the government were losing ground. Explain.
When I quit my job, I was not a right-wing ideologue. But at that time, I did not have a coherent political philosophy. I'd voted for Ronald Reagan. We're talking about 1981. And I had a sympathy for a lot of libertarian ideas, but I didn't think of myself as a libertarian. I'd voted for Jimmy Carter in 1976, for heaven's sakes. That's how incoherent my political views were. But there was only one thing I was convinced of after my years of evaluating social programs at this research company. And that was these programs didn't work and that they had made things worse. They had changed the lives of poor young people, and especially Black poor young people, in ways that tempted them to do things in the short term that were disastrous in the long term. And so I wanted to write a book which talked about these perverse incentives and described them and used lots of data without any interpretation. Just here's what things looked like from 1950 to 1980. and look at the way they've gotten worse. And then I came to the chapters where I had to say what I wanted to do about it. And it was in the course of writing those chapters that I kept finding myself saying, there are constraints on what outsiders can do that really make it difficult to get the incentives right. And I'd also read Robert Nozick by that time, the brilliant libertarian philosopher. And by the time I finished the last parts of Losing Ground, much to my surprise, I found I was a libertarian.
Because government solutions rarely work.
Yeah, I could think of thought experiments of policies that would work. For example, I had a thought experiment saying, well, suppose that we got rid of welfare altogether. Everything, lock, stock, and barrel. And I went through all of the changes and the calculations this would make of women in their expectations of men, the changes it would make in the behavior of men, the variety of other social feedback loops that would be triggered. But of course, we're never going to get rid of the system. And I could think of, guess what? Suppose we gave poor parents the money to send their children to schools of their choice. I went through in my mind and on paper, all of the good things would happen. But of course, that at that time was impractical as well.
In Losing Ground, you have this chart.
Before we go to the chart, I have to do a commercial for PNN. So please go to my store and get the lozenges that I have. I have Manuka honey lozenges in a 21 count. I also have elderberry zinc lozenges in a 21 count. And these lozenges are made from structural nanosilver, so it'll soothe your throat and neutralize pathogens. I also have drops, which are smaller, but in a 100 count with honey and lemon and in blueberry. So please go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the drops and the lozenges, especially when we're getting into the spring season and there's going to be allergens. Also, please go to my store and purchase the pulmonology module that I created. There's 22 lectures with PDF files and a video lecture for each section. Let me read you quickly all the sections that are in the pulmonology module. It's only for $50. So you go to the store, you purchase the module, you'll get an email of your unique password. You'll be able to log in. You can watch the videos as many times as you want, and you'll be able to download the PDF files, or you can view them online. But the whole idea is for you to learn about the pulmonary system. The things that you will learn in this module for $50 are pulmonary embryology, pulmonary anatomy, pulmonary physiology, hemoglobin, pulmonary circulation, hypoxia, ventilation and perfusion, carbon dioxide, lung physical exam, pulmonary function tests, obstructive lung disease, restrictive lung disease, treatment for COPD and asthma, pneumonia, pleural disease, lung cancer, sleep apnea, cystic fibrosis, tuberculosis, sarcoidosis, pulmonary embolism, and how to read chest x-rays. You learn a lot. People that buy this module, it's to challenge your mind, to understand how the human body works, but not just that, to reduce the power imbalance between you and your doctor. So you have more information when you go in and see your doctor, so you can have the best care possible. An informed patient is a good patient. And by having more knowledge about how the body works, you'll be able to understand and how to improve your health. In addition, you'll be able to be a more discerning citizen when you start hearing in the mainstream media or even in alternative news about certain things dealing with a crises like what we just went through in 2020. Having a public that has a better understanding of science and in medicine, you're going to be able to navigate through it better. So please go to my store and purchase the pulmonology module. You get 22 lectures for only $50, and you have access to that as long as you want to see it. You can, there's an unlimited amount of time and unlimited amount of times that you want to download or watch the videos. So just please go to the store and learn about pulmonology, learn about the pulmonary system. And this will allow me to do other modules and teach you other systems like cardiology, like neurology, like renal, all these different systems in the human body and how they all work together to be the you that you are. So it's very important, I think, to have a population that is discerning and informed. So this is a great way to challenge your mind into being an informed citizen. So please go to my store and purchase the product for only $50.
Now, the sharply rising government expenditures addressing poverty.
In that chart, you can see it had tilted upward the line in 1960 to 65, but then it starts to go steep. And guess when it gets even steeper? 1970 to 75, which are the years of Richard Nixon and of Gerald Ford. What happened?
Republicans increased spending on these programs too.
It's only in recent years that I have understood how that was able to happen and why it hadn't happened before.
Why?
Because in 1937, the Supreme Court said that we, the Supreme Court, consciously, explicitly, are going to say that we're siding with Alexander Hamilton in interpreting the phrase general welfare. It took the leash off. Until that decision, the government had stuck pretty close to the list of things in the Constitution that Congress was permitted to legislate on. And that one decision said, no, as long as it has some relationship to the general welfare, it's okay. It didn't make that much difference in the 40s and 50s because the power to do that stuff had been given to them by the court, but they hadn't acted on it much. Lyndon Johnson comes to office after the assassination. Lyndon Johnson, filled with ambition, not filled with scruples, with legislative majorities in both houses of Congress. And he takes that potential power to expand the rule of government that had been there for 20 years and acts on it.
And young me said, good. I have two parents. They're educated. They had me read. I have advantages. Other people don't have those advantages. It's time that government, under wise planners, step in and help the disadvantaged.
Have you given much thought to the water you shower in? The truth is that the easiest and most...
That's the way I felt about it during the same period. It's hard to realize how naive we were about how public policy works at that time. We had very large job training programs, some of them multi-billion. People made $1.12 more per week who had job training than people who didn't. You're talking about minuscule effects. The same disillusionment took a while to set in, but by the early 1970s, those who evaluated social programs on contract to the government, and that was my job during the 1970s, we knew there were no success stories. So all of these things that sounded so great on paper were not working. And guess what? That thing called labor force participation, which means that you are available to work, either you're working or else you're looking for work. For males, up until 1960, that had been close to 100%. It had been about 95% of males. And basically that means all males were able-bodied. That started to drop. And it started to drop not among affluent men, it started to drop among poor men.
Which gets to the title of your book. It wasn't just that the programs didn't work.
Worse than that.
People were losing ground.
Losing ground. The same thing happened with crime. In the mid-1960s, all of the intellectual firepower was saying that punishment is a stupid way of dealing with crime, that putting people into prison only makes them into worse criminals, and therefore we will reduce the use of prisons and we will increase the use of community solutions and probation and so forth. It all sounded very nice on paper, and crime started to go through the roof.
Now, here's the graph
Yeah.
from losing ground.
Yep, violent crime and property crime. That graph starts in 1950. Look at 1950 to 1963. It's virtually flat and low. So you had both low crime, but also among those people who did commit crimes, you had high rates in which they were caught. And of those who were caught, you had high rates of those who went to prison. Then you reduced the risk of going to prison. You reduced the risk of getting caught. In other words, you made it so that crime did pay. And look what happens. This is not rocket science.
After your book was published.
Yes. And so there, that peak of that one, that's again, violent crime rate, is in the early 1990s. And look at what happened and the way that it went down. I would say that mass incarceration had a lot to do with it, because once you get arrested 2 or 3 or 4 times, the odds that you will continue to get arrested are high. There is a small part of the population, 5 to 7% of all those who are ever arrested, who commit an incredibly large proportion of all the crime. And in the mass incarceration, we took an awful lot of those, and I will say men, because they were overwhelmingly men. We took them off the streets, and forget about deterrence effect, forget about any other things that prevented crime among people who were still not in jail. The people who were in jail were not committing crimes. They were incapacitated. You also started in the early 1990s what's called broken windows policing. And that means that if you jump the turnstiles in New York City subways, they start to arrest you.
But let's explain it. It's the broken windows theory, which is that if you see a building with a broken window, you might break other windows. You think it's okay.
This was a famous political scientist named James Q. Wilson, and he observed that if one window is broken and it's not fixed, in a matter of weeks, all the windows will be broken because nobody cares. I understand the subways in New York City are not as pleasant to go on now as they were 15 years ago.
You've probably seen people going in through the slam gates, hopping over the turnstiles.
That because you are not arresting the turnstile jumpers anymore. You aren't arresting people for lots of things anymore that you did during the 1990s and the first decade of the 2000s. And lo and behold, these are transmogrifying into more serious crimes. And they're also creating an atmosphere of danger and just a sordid atmosphere in the places that are covered with graffiti and show other evidence of nobody caring.
But America was cruel. America locks up a higher percentage of our people than almost any other country, mostly minorities. That's not right.
If they are in jail for possession of a few too many ounces of marijuana and they've got a 20-year prison sentence, you can say, well, that's stupid. But that's also not the way it usually works. So that you have a person who is putatively in prison for a drug offense. It turns out that he was actually arrested for repeated robberies, but this got plea bargained down. So that instead of taking him to court for the repeated robberies, they were going to sentence him on the drug charge. When you look at what these guys had done to get put in prison, there are very few minor offenders who end up in prison. Now, should we expect the racial composition of the prisoners to reflect the general population? No, we should expect it to reflect the population of people who are committing crimes. And because of that, yes, you have an awful lot of blacks in prison. You have a lot of Latinos in prison. You have almost no Asians in prison. They're a minority, right? But they just don't commit crimes, and so it's very, very seldom go to prison. The composition of the prison population is not disproportionate to the crime rates of the different racial groups.
So America just has more criminals?
The same story is effectively true in Europe as well. The racial composition of the prison populations show the same profile they do in the United States.
So back to losing ground. This happens because kids don't have two parents or a father in the home?
That is a major factor. Clearly, the rise in crime that occurred in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, the cause was not genetic. Genes don't change in populations over a course of 15 or 20 years. It was a change in the environment. Let me turn to a kind of statement which is people will jump on you for making.
This bobblehead is just ridiculous. And did you notice who it is? That's right, none other than the man who will make this country great once again. Tagline, I'll be back in 2024. This Trumpinator bobblehead is a rare collectible, and patriots are scarfing them up like crazy. So grab yours now because they'll be gone quicker than Sleepy Joe's memory. Isn't this baby just beautiful? These are just fantastic, let me tell you. They're perfect to collect and keep for yourself, or maybe even to gift a friend or family member who loves Joe.
Which is kids need.
You know, it's interesting that little ad that popped up, but the country is at a crossroad, and it is very important to try to save it, to try to get back to common ground, and to enhance the idea of God, country, and family. Because if we don't, the negative side of that is horrific, and that we may lose our country.
Dads. And dads serve a couple of functions. One is that little boys latch on to role models. To some extent, little girls do too, but it's a stronger trait. And boys look up to who's the male that I'm going to imitate. And I think those who are watching, who are the parents of little boys and of little girls both, have noticed the degree to which the little boy looks at the dad from a very young age. And he's obviously saying, okay, so this is how a guy is supposed to behave. If that male is not in the home, what's the role model that adolescent boys choose? The toughest, strongest adolescent boy in their group. A worse role model than which it is hard to imagine. So you have an interaction of social policy that affects the formation of families, that also has impacts down the road in the proportion of males growing up in single parent families who end up in jail.
So the welfare system, meant to help these families, said, we'll give you money if you're in need. But if you had a married man in the home who worked, you'd lose money.
Yeah.
Hence, again, losing ground. And let's look at the history. Your book was written a number of years ago. Since then, spending has only gone up. And it's interesting that Ronald Reagan supposedly slashed welfare in 81. And there was a little drop briefly.
And then slower growth, but then it goes back, shooting back up again.
And then there was welfare reform in 96, the end of welfare.
Yep. And it flattens again for a year or two, flattens a little bit. The demand constantly grows and nobody has any incentives to say no. There's a program for physical disability payments that technically ought to be a wonderful program to have, because suppose a guy who's a manual worker is physically disabled, cannot work through an accident or something. This seems a reasonable thing to do as a government. And it is, if you administer it carefully. But in an era when medicine has been getting better and better, when prostheses and other kinds of things we didn't have available have been improving enormously, the proportion of males who are physically disabled and unable to work has risen dramatically. Now tell me how that is. And the answer, how it is the administration of the program, which is in effect saying to guys, if you can get the right doctor to assign the right certificates, you can have an income stream for the rest of your life.
And you're a sucker if you don't take this free stuff.
And if you are insisting on hobbling to work, even though technically you perhaps are disabled, you're a chump.
Do you see what you write in government policy? Reagan cited you and talked about welfare reform.
I raised some of the questions discussed by the scholarly work of Charles Murray.
So he didn't really do much.
Well, Bill Clinton on NBC News before the bell curve came out,
and made you forbidden.
Yes, referred to my op-ed about the coming flight underclass. And he said, Charles and I have disagreed about many things, as if we'd had these bull sessions at a college dorm. But I think he's done the country a service with this.
Yeah, I read Charles Murray's latest article on this, and I think he did the country a great service. I mean, he and I often have disagreed, but I think his analysis is essentially right.
So I saw that, and I saw this Welfare Reform Act of 1996, which lots of people very generously said was a product of losing ground. But I looked at that Welfare Reform Act and said, is it better than nothing? Yeah. Is it going to make a big difference in the kinds of outcomes I'm most worried about? I don't see how it will. So the answer to your question is, I'll tell you cases where I've become really happy because I've seen that my writing has had effects. I was at Harvard.
Before we go to that, let's go to commercial. So please go to my store and get the structural nano silver liquid, max 35. Take a teaspoon of this a day. It's part of my anti-aging protocol. It will neutralize pathogens. And if you're not feeling well, take a tablespoon or two a day until you start feeling well. And that will help you to get to homeostasis. It's part of my anti-aging protocol. It's synergistic with C60 and the turmeric and ashwagandha. It's the three pillars to slowing down aging and to improve your immune system. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the max 35 or the max 14 and take a teaspoon of it a day. Another thing that's very important for getting your health to its highest level is to make sure that you get a probiotic. I have 2 probiotics on my store. The powdered form, which is what I have here in my hand. Mix the powder in food or into water. Take it daily. I also have it in tablet form for the ones that don't want to take the powder. But please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the probiotic. For people that don't know, you need to have the right gut biome to have proper metabolism and better communication between your gut and your liver, and also your gut and your brain, and to have the proper absorption. So please go to my store and get the probiotics. Lastly, please go to my store and get the multivitamins that I offer. Multivitamin has cofactors in it that will help with enzymatic activity so you have the proper metabolism in your cells. So please go to the store and get the multivitamin. This multivitamin that I have is easy to digest. And, you need vitamins such as the B complexes, which is also a product that I have on my store, where you're improving the mitochondria electron transport chain, creating ATP. You need vitamin B1, B2, B3, B4, and B5 to have proper electron transport chain function. If you don't have proper electron transport chain function, you're going to have less ATP, less energy, and reduced cell function and reduced immune system. So please go to my store and get the great health products that I offer and follow my protocol. It's about taking the liquid nano silver regularly, taking the C60 to neutralize free radicals and to bring down inflammation by taking ashwagandha and turmeric.
Years ago, and with the student groups there, after Coming Apart had been published. And I found that the dinner we were having for the students was being attended by the couple that had financed my visit to Harvard. And so I went over to thank them. And they said, yes, we're big fans. In fact, we read Coming Apart. And so we moved from Greenwich, Connecticut, famously wealthy, upper class, to a little rural town in Connecticut, because you said that this is what you ought to do. And part of me at that point said, it's only a book, you know, but then they said, and we love it. And it had changed their lives and they had richer lives. I take a lot more satisfaction out of that than I do about getting credit for the 1996 welfare reform, because it's more concrete. So on a retail level, has my writing, I think, done some good for some people? Yes, it has. On a national level, nah.
Here's a graph we made up at Stossel TV, the poverty rate. And it shows that Americans were lifting themselves out of poverty before welfare began, year after year, thousands and thousands of people. Then checks started coming and the poverty rate dropped even more for 6 or 7 years. But since then, progress has stopped. It's gone up and down.
Yeah, if you get that starts in 1959, we have now reconstructed poverty data going back to the end of World War II, when almost half of the population was below the poverty line. So we had an incredible success in the war on poverty from the end of World War II to the late 1960s.
By not having welfare programs.
Yeah. So with this graph, I have colleagues who will rightly point out that the poverty numbers don't include in-kind benefits, non-cash benefits. And if you add those in, there has been more progress. And I would say, yeah, but you know, suppose instead of using this measure of the poverty rate, what percentage of the population are making on their own the income that keeps them above the poverty line? And then you would see not only that flat trend line that you just showed, you would see the proportion who are not making enough money to stay above poverty.
But why even ask that question? Why is it important that they make it on their own?
And there's where we go back to self-respect again. Here's where social class makes a difference. If you are in a family where you are a PhD who only makes a professor's salary, and you have a wife who works as an executive at Google, and your take-home pay is $95,000 a year, and hers is 1.5 million, I think the professor friend actually know a couple that's pretty much in that situation. I don't think he has any problems with self-esteem. He's doing his job. He's a fulfilling job, and the rest of that. And the fact that his wife is making a fortune is nice. It doesn't bother him. But if you are talking about lower income groups, it's really important that the guy have made the money if he's to feel any self-respect. And he's not making that up. If you are a male who is able-bodied and you are not working, what's the point of your life?
Go enjoy life.
And that is why we are back at the nature of happiness and human flourishing. And happiness is not a good bowl of popcorn. Happiness is not good sex. Happiness is not any momentary pleasure. Happiness is a sense of getting to 70, a mere child by my standards at this point, but getting to 70 and saying to yourself, I can be satisfied with who I have been and what I have done. And if what you have done with your life is sort of wiled away with amusements, I think you have a real hard time saying to yourself, I've spent a life well lived.
And in your book, Coming Apart, you argue that America's dividing into those of us who went to college and got married, and the divide and versus those who don't, and the divide keeps getting bigger.
The mistake I made in Coming Apart was I looked at the white working class. That book was exclusively about non-Latino whites. Again, take the racial problems out of the equation. And I thought that the white working class was getting so demoralized that they would not be a political force. And what I missed was the degree to which they were getting angry. And that surfaced in 2016, big time.
Why don't you turn your camera? Show them how many people come to these rallies. Turn them. Go ahead, turn them. Go ahead.
And it has proved ever since to be an extraordinarily powerful thing. There is a sense out there.
2016 meaning with the election.
With the election of Donald Trump. Yeah. There is, I think, an enormous sense that demoralization is part of it, but also a real sense that we're no longer living in a country that gives me the respect I deserve, that gives me the chances I deserve. And that explains a lot of the energy behind.
And I think that this growing anger within the white community in America is going to counteract this forced reparations and tear the country apart into a potential civil war. And throw back any gains of racial equality about 4 or 5 decades back, maybe even more.
Election of Donald Trump then, and it has been fueled by the increasingly obvious, open, unapologetic disdain of the people who live in flyover country, of the rednecks. Rednecks is the only ethnic slur you can use these days and get away with. You know, this really is the only one. And this is not lost on ordinary Americans. And it's not just the white working class. It's increasingly the black working class. It's not just the working class. It's also increasingly the middle class who look at the people who are running the country and say, we don't know these people. We don't recognize them as having the same values, the same patriotism, the same devotion to the country that we do.
You criticize the upper class for supporting welfare, help the poor, but culturally abandoning people. They've abdicated their role as stewards of the culture, celebrating marriage, community, productive work, the fulfillment that people of faith derive. Celebrating doesn't mean passing laws. It means
talking about it. And they don't have to go out and stand in a soapbox. But if you are in a happy marriage with children and it has been a source of great satisfaction, don't go out there and say, oh, but all families are equal in terms of their functioning and so forth. You don't have to demonize single mothers. You can acknowledge there are lots of single mothers doing a heroic job, but they are doing it in very difficult circumstances. There's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, is really good for the kids if they're born into a married family, and the married family really is the way to go. They don't say that. They go out of their way to say, no, no, no. It's almost as if the elite wants to keep the good stuff for itself.
And we, more affluent people who go to college, are behaving in the ways you advocate. We do tend to get married. We do tend to work.
Yes, and that's been true since the 1980s.
And that's the coming apart.
Yeah.
And we marry somebody else who does.
In 1993, I wrote an op-ed titled The Coming White Underclass. And at that time, the out-of-wedlock birth ratio for whites was about 22, 23%. And I said, guess what? Whites are now approaching the same level that blacks were back in the early 1960s when Daniel Patrick Moynihan wrote about the breakdown of the black family. And I said, what we have coming down the road is a white underclass. And it became obvious that these births were concentrated among low-income whites. And in a way, what I talked about in Coming Apart was the realization of that prediction. It wasn't that we had a coming white underclass, we had a white underclass.
But it would be arrogant for affluent white people to preach to poorer people.
The sign of a vibrant, growing civilization, according to many historians, is a confident upper class, confident in its own values, and one that openly says, okay, this is the way up people ought to live in the society. The Victorian British, classic example. The Victorians basically socialized the entire English population into Victorian middle-class values. And as a result, when London was urbanizing at an unprecedented rate, the crime rate did not go up. Unheard of to have that kind of level of urbanization and no increase in crime. But it was the Victorians who had successfully passed on their values. In the United States, the upper class feels guilty. They feel arrogant and look down on those who aren't part of the upper class, but they also have a sense of guilt about their being there and other people not being there. It's very dysfunctional.
While you've called yourself a libertarian today and you wrote a book, What It Means to Be a Libertarian, on Twitter recently, you wrote, you're no longer a libertarian.
I call myself a Madisonian now.
Nobody knows what that means.
I know. I'm not in the business of mass marketing anything. And Madisonian now captures my evolved attitude. I think libertarian solutions are entirely compatible with vibrant families and communities. In fact, I think they are the way to achieve vibrant families and community. But I'm also much more attuned to the importance of virtue in the people than I used to be. By virtue in the people, I'm borrowing the language of the founders.
So the fun thing with the serpent is, how does a serpent talk? And not only that, but why is the serpent's punishment to crawl on its belly?
Who said this Constitution will not work except for moral and religious people. And my earlier libertarianism said that if you had a libertarian society, that in a way that would take care of itself because behaving in virtuous ways would be rewarded. Well, I think it's also important to have a culture that openly values the traditional virtues. And I think also a religious culture gives you a huge leg up in that. And but by the way, in that regard, the founders were not doctrinaire Christians. Jefferson was a deist. Some of the other founders were, we don't know how orthodox they were in their Christianity, but they were unanimous in saying that the role of religion in enabling a free society was huge.
We libertarians tend not to say that.
No, and the founders did. Madison did very emphatically. I'm increasingly impressed as I've gotten older how brilliant the Constitution was. Yeah, they should have gotten rid of slavery. That was the tragic flaw that was bound to come back and pull us down. But the Constitution otherwise really worked.
Well, the thing with the Constitution, to get all the states to sign up, there had to be some compromise, and part of that compromise was this issue with slavery. And the idea was that over time that it would resolve itself, and history showed that it resolved itself during the Civil War.
For a century and a half, in ways that were wonderful to behold. So, Madisonian, that's what I am.
And part of that is the forbidden words today, Western culture.
Yeah.
And what does Western culture mean? Why is it forbidden to say that today? That's what you need to make a society work well for its people.
The world has had 3 or 4 great civilizations, but the two that stand out are the and apologies to my South Asian friends, but I would say China and the West. And in these two cases, you had civilizations that developed fully realized cultures and ethics and economies, and they had different strengths, but they both had magnificent strengths. We are inheritors of the West. We in the United States. It was founded by Brits, basically, the British peoples, and then it's expanded into Europe, and we've more recently had immigrants from other parts of the world. But the culture here is grounded in Western culture. And why people don't recognize now the great achievements of that culture mystifies me. Did Western countries do bad things ever? Yes. Did they have wars? Yes, they did that. Did they colonize country? Yeah, they did all those things. And those have to be considered. But art, literature, science, health, towering achievements. We should be proud of them.
It seems like a lot of what you write about, human achievement, you've just lost now amidst the trend toward equity. Aren't you upset?
I'm deeply depressed. No, it's worse than that. I don't see a way back out. We are looking not just now at a failure to elect a person on the right. We now do not have a right that I can recognize at all. I got along fine with traditional conservatives, with Bill Buckley and with the neocons, Irving Kristol and so forth. I had disagreements, but you had common ground as well with me as a libertarian. And also for a long time, it seemed to me that libertarian views were gaining ground. You and I, if I may speak for you, we are alone in the world now. What is the organized group that wants to have limited government return? It's certainly not the Trump people, not the MAGA people. They are talking about big government being just fine as long as the kind of big government that works for us. Who these days is talking about we really ought to do something about the deficit that you have a few lone voices.
I think Rand Paul, it really falls into this category that he's looking for. And I would have voted for Rand Paul if they ran for president, but maybe it's not his time yet. But maybe in the future, potentially.
You don't have any, the things we believe in, because we have extremely similar beliefs, John. We have watched on our own lifetime our hopes and dreams turn to smoldering ruins.
So why are you smiling?
Because what else am I going to do?
Let me give you some positive thought here. Go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get some sleep by taking my Goodnight formula. This will allow you to get the REM sleep that you are needing to be well rested, to consolidate memory, and to remove toxins, especially from the central nervous system. It is known that if you have chronic lack of REM sleep, that you're not going to be well rested, your memory will go down, and you will build up toxins. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. That's the-studio-reykjavik.com, and go and get the Goodnight formula that's on my store to improve your REM sleep. Also go to my store and get the C60. I have it in 2 ounce, 4 ounce, and an 8 ounce configuration, either in coconut oil or in avocado oil. C60 is a very potent antioxidant that will neutralize free radicals, and it will help to improve the mitochondrial health in your cells so you can get more energy. To improve your immune system, on a daily basis, take magnesium and zinc. If you're not feeling well, take a double dose of this. This is very important to add to your daily protocol. I've partnered up with Rainbow Herbals, and we've created these very high quality deodorant bars. This one is in peppermint, lavender, and tea tree, and the other one that we have is in citrus. So please go to the store and get these high quality deodorants. They're dual purpose. Not only do they act as a deodorant for males and females, but it will also help to detoxify the body. The ingredients that are in these deodorants are made from the Himalayas. They're essential oils from the Himalayas. These are very high quality deodorants. So please go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com.
It doesn't begin to capture it. And in a way, talk about feeling that maybe your life hasn't been lived as fruitfully as you would like. It's so bad in terms of my hopes for this country. I don't see how you energize a new generation to recover that. The good news is that old people are habitually too pessimistic. And so let's say that I cannot foresee how you turn this around, but here I will hearken back to the religious Great Awakenings that the United States has had 3 of, 4, depending on which historian you read, but that came out of nowhere. And in the early 19th century, it resulted in a reduction of alcohol consumption, which had been incredible, to very low levels in a matter of a couple of years. And in other ways, you've had enormous impacts of Great Awakenings. It's not impossible that there will be a civic Great Awakening, reawakening of some sort.
By reduction in alcohol consumption, you're not talking prohibition.
No, I'm talking in the early 19th century. Americans drank enormous amounts of whiskey. And as part of the religious Great Awakening, you had the temperance movement, and the empirical record about the per capita consumption of alcohol in the early 19th century was that it dropped like a rock. This country has proved itself in the past to be able to spin on a dime. I simply don't see how that happens this time, and I do see lots of signs of a civilization in decay.
But you're an old man. As you said,
man.
old people are pessimistic.
Yep. And I'm perfectly willing for other people to say that to me and to say, you're right, go out there and fight the good fight.
Thank you, Charles Murray.
It's been a pleasure.
Well, I think that was a good video. It gives a larger perspective, especially when you dovetail it into some of my comments about reparations and DEI. You know, this whole idea of reparations and DEI is tearing the country apart. You have ultra liberal agendas, primarily promoted by the Democratic Party, trying to get votes, trying to divide, and trying to create social programs that are in perpetuity. So these are making the country, I think, less productive and less economically viable. In addition, if you weaken the strength of the dollar and of the moral fiber of the United States, you are adding to the probability of a one world government. So like Reagan said, you know, we're the last bastion of liberty for the world. So if we fail, the whole world goes down. With that said, thank you for listening. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the products that I offer, such as the supplements, the ebooks, the anti-aging boxes, the deodorants, but also please purchase the pulmonology lecture series that I've created for only $50 so you can learn about the pulmonary system. You'll learn a lot. I have 22 different lectures that will digest it in small bits and pieces, so you will be able to absorb this newfound knowledge and apply it to your own health. So thank you for listening, and please ask your social network to follow me. I'm heavily censored on YouTube for obvious reasons. So please help to repopulate some of the lost subscribers that YouTube bleeds every time I publish on the big channel. I'm not the only one this happens to. So any of the larger channels that do listen to my work, please, if you could send some of your subscribers my way to sign up and follow all my channels. That's the 3 channels that I have on YouTube, Brighteon, Bitchute, Rumble. All the links are in the description of this video and all my videos. If we don't work together as a team in the alternative news world, we are all going to fall eventually. So thank you for listening and have a nice day.